I think that one of the things about preference falsification is that when you start to believe that this is a robust phenomenon, that all of the economic models that assume that your private preferences and public preferences are the same, you start to see the world very differently.
Mm-hmm.
And so this is one of the portals into an alternate way of seeing the universe so as not to get surprised by revolutions.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's always, it's always this question, in my mind, this question of preference falsification, the Tim McCron theory is tightly coupled to this question of, how intense is the problem of political correctness, where, how much pressure is there on people to say things they don't actually believe. And I always come back to thinking that the problem of political correctness in some sense is our biggest political problem, that we live in a world where people are super uncomfortable saying what they think, that it's sort of dangerous. To use the Silicon Valley context, it's a problem that Silicon Valley has become a one-party state. But there are two different senses in which you can be a one-party state. One sense is that everybody just happens to believe this one thing, which is one thing, and then the other one is in which 85% of the people believe one thing, and the other 15% pretend to. And it's sort of like it's a dynamic with super majorities where in a democracy we think 51% of the people believe something, they're probably right. If 70 to 80% believe something, it's almost more certainly right. But if you have 99.99% of the people believe something, at some point you shifted from democratic truth to North Korean insanity. And so there's a subtle tipping point where the wisdom of crowds shifts into something that's sort of softly totalitarian or something like that. And so in my mind, it maps very much onto this question of the problem of political correctness, and it's always hard to measure how big it is. In a politically correct society, of course, we're just saying what we think. We all love Stalin, we all love Chairman Mao, and maybe we're just singing these songs because we're all enthusiastic about it. And I think my read on it is that problem has gotten more acute in a lot of parts of our society over the last few decades.
Yeah, I think that's gotten. Well, as you know, I started this whole intellectual dark web concept in part to create kind of a broad-based and bipartisan coalition of people who are willing to speak out in public and take some risk, speaking for a large number of people. I would never have understood how many people feel terrified to speak out if I hadn't done that, because people come up to me all the time and say, thank you for saying what I can't say at work. And then when I ask them, well, what is it that you can't say at work? It's absolutely shocking. Completely commonplace things, things that are not at all dangerous, not scary or frightening. One of the things I believe, and I don't know whether you're gonna agree with this, is that you start to understand that a lot of the people who are enforcing the political correctness suspect that they are covering up dangerous truths. So for example, if you believe that IQ equals intelligence, which I do not, I mean, let's just be honest about it, you're going to fear anything that shows a variation in IQ between groups. If you don't believe IQ equals intelligence, if you believe that intelligence is a much richer story and that no group is that far out of the running, you're not terribly frightened of the data because you have lots of different ways of understanding what's happening. And also you generally find that the truth is the best way of lifting people out of their situation. So I secretly suspect, to be blunt about it, and this is kind of horrible, that a lot of Silicon Valley is extremely bigoted and misogynistic, and it can't actually make eye contact with the fact that it secretly thinks women aren't as good programmers, where I happen to think, Fisherian equivalence suggests that males and females, one protein apart, SRY protein, are not likely to be, they might have different forms of intelligence and different forms of cognitive strengths. But if you don't actually worry too much about an intellectual difference, you'd be willing to have an intellectual conversation that was quite open about it. So maybe I can turn that around as a...
Yeah, let me see. There's sort of a lot of different things I want to react to there. I suspect that it's it's a distraction of sorts. I think on this very superficial layer, we want to have debates. We want to have debates in a lot of areas, a lot of hard questions, and there are questions in science and technology and philosophy and religion. There are all these questions that I think it would be healthy to debate. And there's a way in which political debates are sort of a low form of these questions. And there's one sense in which I think of these political questions as less important or less elevated than some of these others. But there's also a sense in which these questions about politics are ones that that everyone can have access to. And so if you can't even have a debate about politics, you can't say, I like the man with the strange orange hairdo, or I like the mean grandmother.
Yeah.
If you can't even say that, then we've sort of frozen out discussion on a lot of other areas. And that's always one of the reasons I think that political correctness starts with correctness about politics, and that when you aren't allowed to talk about that area, you've implicitly frozen out a lot of others that are maybe more important, and we're certainly not going to have a debate about string theory if we can't even have a common sense debate about politics or something like that. I'm very sympathetic to the sort of distraction theory that a lot of these sort of that what's going on in our society is like a psychosocial hypnotic magic trick where we're being distracted from something very important, and political correctness, identity politics, maybe American exceptionalism, sort of these various ideological systems are distracting us from things. The thing I keep thinking is the main thing it's distracting us from is the stagnation, and is that that there are these problems that we don't want to talk about in our society. It's possible it's also a way to distract us from bad thoughts that we have about people of the sort you said. But the one I would go back to first is just that it's distracting us from dealing with problems. The reason we have a newspeak, the sort of Orwellian newspeak in politics with these zombie politicians, and Hillary Clinton or Jeb Bush or whoever it might be, is that we're not supposed to talk about the real issues. And maybe they have a bad conscience and they think they're bad people, but it's just, I think the primary thing is just too dangerous to talk about what's actually going on. They don't know what to do about it, and better not talk about that.
Yeah, I think there's another take on it, which, if I'm honest about it, probably originates from my side of the aisle, which is that I have a sense that if you believe that productivity and growth is over, you don't want to emphasize issues of merit because you don't really think that the merit's going to translate. And so therefore, all you can focus on, like, a board of a company is just a bunch of slots at a trough. And so you have to make sure that every group has its slots at the trough,
right? Because
it doesn't actually matter. The board isn't doing anything to begin with. And so it's only a question of receiving the wealth that is already there. And so I worry that is, I guess where I break with a lot of progressives is that I believe that most progress comes from progress, which is technologically led and informationally led, that the more we know and the more we can do, the more we can take care of people.
Yeah, so I mean, again, this is always maybe naive hope on my part, or something like this. But I always think that when we can't talk about things, that we can't solve them, and that this is
exactly.
And so that maybe these are the calculations you make, and this is the way we pat people on the head, even though they're never going to get ahead, or something like that. But it's never going to work.
Let's
and
go
eventually,
down swinging.
And people aren't that stupid, and they will eventually figure it out. And so that's sort of why I'm undermotivated to play that game.
Yeah, I have to say that one of the things that I've learned from you is that it's one thing to have a contrarian position. It's another thing to hold it when the whole world starts hating on you. For example, I watched the world go from viewing removing Gawker as removing a nuisance or worse that was threatening people selectively to a concern, about like First Amendment rights and silencing, free speech. And, I do have the strong sense that people are willfully misinterpreting these actions that are necessary to sort of self-correct in our society and are not being terribly honest. There's a lot of bad faith acting in our system at the moment.
Yeah, but again, I'm always this is again where I'm always quite hopeful that people realize there's a lot of bad faith acting, and they discount this.
They grow out of it
accordingly. And